Welcome to Everyday Buddhism, making every day better by applying the proven tools found in Buddhist concepts. Welcome to episode 74 of Everyday Buddhism, making every day better. This is a mirror episode of the podcast Zen at the Sharp End by Mark Westmoquette, where I was invited to talk about my experience with, quote, troublesome Buddhas, unquote. Now, the Zen at the Sharp End podcast focuses on how to turn difficult people and relationships and episodes or situations in your life into your best teachers. In each episode of the podcast, Mark interviews Zen and other Buddhist friends and acquaintances, exploring different types of people, relationships, and situations that we find irritating, difficult, or painful. They discuss how Buddhist and mindfulness practices can help us see our difficult people or situations as troublesome Buddhas, our greatest teachers. Mark's podcast is a spin-off of his book, Zen and the Art of Dealing with Difficult People. Now, I'm sharing this episode of Mark's podcast on my own podcast because I think what Mark has to teach with this method is something every one of my listeners can benefit from. And I'm sharing because I am painfully honest in this episode. So I debated, kind of, sharing it directly with you, but I believe it is in our shared vulnerability that Buddhist practice comes alive. I hope you'll agree. I will put links to Mark's podcast, website, and book in the show notes. Plus, as I mentioned at the end of the podcast episode, I will soon be inviting Mark to be a guest on a future episode of my podcast, Everyday Buddhism. So the episode featuring my troublesome Buddhas starts now.
Oh, so welcome, Wendy Shinyo, and thank you so much for being willing to come on the podcast today.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
Maybe we can get started if you just talk a little bit about maybe what got you into Buddhism, or your sort of history or journey into Buddhist practice, and how you got to where you are today.
Well, I guess I became serious about Buddhism in the 1990s after many years of being a nightstand Buddhist, where the books piled up on high and never doing anything about it except reading. But I got more serious in the 1990s and started practicing with I started studying first in the Galupa tradition online, and then I started practicing at a local Tibetan center, which was the Drikung Kagyu tradition, which is a different sort of sect of the Kagyu school. I don't know
Is that
if you
local to where you are now, or
local to Rochester, New York. Yes, that's where I'm
okay.
located. Yeah. So I joined that Sangha and became a member of that Sangha and practiced with them for many years. And then I was asked to teach in a basic Buddhism course for that center. And that was after I'd taken some teacher training in the Galupa tradition. So so that got me serious. And that was when I officially took refuge for the first time, And then so I studied with them and practiced with them for many years. And then I sort of had I don't think we Buddhists call it a crisis of faith, but I think I'll call it that way. A crisis of faith in the Tibetan tradition. There was a disconnect for me. The center practiced a lot of Vajrayana visualization. I visualized terribly. And there were a lot of things. It was just time to go, and I was doing Noondro practice at the time, and I don't know if you know anything about Noondro,
No.
but it's like 100,000 prostrations, 100,000 offerings, 100,000,
Ah.
and you had to tick them off, and
Mm.
they were full body prostrations. And um, my center director always said when I left Tibetan Buddhism in the middle of the in the middle of the Noondro practice, he said it was the Noondro that brought me to where I needed to go.
Mm.
So at that
Mm.
time, I discovered the writings of Reverend Gyome Kabose and Reverend Koyo Kabose, of the Bright Dawn Center of Oneness Buddhism, and I got very interested in what they had to offer. They're a non-sectarian Japanese Mahayana
Uh-huh.
tradition. So the influence is strongly Shin and Zen Buddhism. And I don't know if
Mm.
you know anything about Shin Buddhism. It's kind
Mm.
of like it's most people haven't really heard about it, but yet it's probably one of the most practiced traditions, especially in Japan.
Yeah, that's
Um,
Pure Land School, is it?
it's a Pure Land school. Yeah, it's not Jodo, but Jodo Shinshu. Yeah,
Mm.
definitely.
Mm.
Founded by Shinran,
Mm.
whose teacher was Honan. So anyway, so that's the story. So I started practice. I started reading their stuff. They were in Chicago, but they had a lot of online things that they were doing, and then they started a school for lay ministry. And I applied and was accepted to that school as one of the second cohorts and I was inducted as a lay minister and sensei in 2009. And now I was one of the first of like now 90 about 100 lay ministers. So
I see. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
so that's kind of my,
Mm.
I guess that's my Buddhist bibliography. I
Mm.
continue to support Bright Dawn, and still do as a teacher, program coordinator, and senior advisor.
Mm.
It's we're now in a transition period with them because we just lost our teacher, Reverend Koyo Kabose. He
Ah.
just
Ah.
passed unexpectedly in March. So
Mm.
so that's my sort of background in
Mm.
Buddhism officially.
Mm. Mm. So kind of interesting, broad mix of vaguely Japanese, but sort of mostly just Mahayana practice then.
Mostly just Mahayana.
Mm.
Although I did do some Vajrayana practice, it never stuck,
Mm.
and so I'm mostly a Mahayana practitioner.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, and in all that, so did you come across the sort of idea of people being um, difficult people being teachers and difficult people bringing sort of Buddhist practice up to the fore and how we can work with that? You know, did that sort of feature in those?
Well, I had never heard your term as troublesome Buddhist, but I actually had two teachers, and I just thought of this morning before I got
Mm.
on with you. Is that one of my teachers said that all problematic or difficult situations in your life are Buddhas.
Mm. Mm.
That's the way he put it. Um, and that always struck me,
Mm.
and I think that's much like what you are talking about as a troublesome Buddha. And another one of my teachers, one of my very early first Buddhist teachers, a lama in the Galupa tradition, said, "Watch out, anyone can be a Buddha."
Yeah. Mhm.
so so it was kind of a strange mix of like thankful for difficult situations because they are teaching you, and kind of like watch out because Santa is looking out over.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny that those kind of phrases that teachers say, you know, probably mixed in amongst a conversation and saying some other things, they just suddenly like sticking. Like, yes, that makes sense. Mm.
Yeah, yeah. Some of I think our biggest teachings with all the teachers that I've had over the years, some of the biggest teachings are the ones that were done like offhanded or
Mm.
you know what I mean? Just
Yeah.
when they're chatting with you or when they make a funny little comment after a teaching or something.
Mm. 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 Yeah. So every difficult situation, every difficult person can be a Buddha. Mm.
could actually be a Buddha. Yeah, that's the thing. You actually have to visualize it, because if we take the teachings of Buddhism seriously, it's like all dharmas, right? If we take the teachings of Buddhism seriously, then there's no difference between a situation and thing or a person.
Exactly. Mm.
Right? I mean,
Yeah.
if you really look at it that way. So why not all difficult situations as Buddhas?
And if you start to say, well, that's not Buddha, but that is, then you're in this sort of separation,
Duality, yeah.
duality. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
So, I think sometimes though, when we're too comfortable in all our easy situations, maybe that's when the Buddhas are napping.
Yeah, yeah. So then, how have they appeared troublesomely for you?
Well, I think like, I've listened to a few of your episodes, and I think like anybody, if you asked somebody about that, there would be you could have a long list of
Yeah.
that, but I think the one that is the most dramatic for me, um, is the one that sort of culminated for me in the last year and a half, 2 years. Um, sort of as a cause or as a condition of the pandemic.
Ah.
Um, um, I, you know, long story short, I've struggled with resentment all my life, and I wasn't really sure where it came from. I'm a very positive person by nature, but then
Mm,
there was this thing that was
mm,
always kind of in the back of my mind. I finally figured out a lot of what it was I came out as gay when people did not do that
mm,
in the 60s.
mhm,
I'm almost 70 years old and was not accepted. And even as a
mm,
child, when my mother discovered a diary or a journal about entry about my feelings in that respect, I she reacted in the best way she knew how for the times. So I've reconciled it, and I've forgiven it. Um, but she, told my teacher, and they kept me away from this other person.
mm,
And so there was a whole lot of drama around it. And
mhm,
I think the resentment started there and continued on through college, where I wasn't accepted again, and it continued on. And because I was always sort of a self-aware and pragmatic person, I kept coming to terms with it and saying, "Well, I understand where they're coming from."
mm,
So I was rationalizing
mm,
their behavior, which was good. But what I found out is that when the pandemic hit, um, and people started acting, everybody except everybody dealt with the pandemic in a different way.
yeah, definitely.
We
Mm,
all have different ways of handling things. And this was something that, nobody in our generations that are alive now, very few anyway, had any experience with something at this level of uncertainty, right?
right, right.
And because of that, they reacted very dramatically. Some people, became like me, where I read everything I could, and it was like getting an offline virology degree, and could not take my eyes off of it. And some people, buried their head in the sand,
Mm,
and did I see a lot of people did spiritual bypassing. A lot of
mm,
a lot of people reacted in anger that this thing happened to them because of something out there, and then there were all these conspiracy theories. So
mm,
anyway, all those people that reacted in a way that I didn't react made me broke me down completely. I
right,
was like, and see, I have a systemic lupus, so I was overprotective
mm,
of my condition, and I thought everybody else was out to get me.
Mm.
Now, this was totally irrational, yet maybe not for the times. But then I ended up I was just acting in abnormal ways, feeling anger and even rage, and which was just totally out of character. And I
Mm.
finally decided that I needed to seek therapy, even though I thought, well, I'm meditating, I'm doing all this.
Mm.
Why can't I control this? And why
Right.
do I keep looking at all these people as others when I know they're not others? I
Mm.
know we're all interdependent, and I know they all have their reasons for this, but I couldn't separate it, and I ended up being diagnosed as having um, chronic PTSD
I see.
from betrayal from my coming out, and all those
Right.
years of
I see.
being being not abused, but being not treated like a
Mm.
human being,
Right,
and
right, right.
because I dealt with it on the surface so well, it was
Mm.
hiding inside. Uh,
Have you come across this book called The Body Keeps the Score?
oh yes,
Mm.
It's a Bible. It's
It's
a
a Bible.
Bible.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, it was my therapist that recommended it,
Right. Mm.
and it makes perfect sense, and I get it now, and
Mm.
I've been working with it since I
Yeah.
was diagnosed in a year. I'm much better now. I'm
Mm.
like don't even have it now, and now it seems absolutely ridiculous when I look at how I felt about this. Do you know it? But I had so many people close to me that were acting where I thought so irrationally that
Mm.
it broke me down.
Mm. It's funny, isn't it? So rationally, it looks ridiculous, and we can't possibly believe that we're thinking and feeling the way we are. But yet, we have our conscious sort of intellectual mind, cognitive mind, and then we
Right.
have this very, very strong feeling sense that's sort of really stuck in, embedded in, and that's as real, isn't it?
Oh, it's as real, and what I came to learn as a Buddhist practitioner, when you talk about troublesome Buddhists,
Mm.
it was, I've had a lot of troublesome Buddhas, like, you know, being gay and being forced to deal with that, having chronic illness, a severe chronic illness. And I always thought of them as kind of like blessings because they
Mm.
made me see the world in a different way and maybe have more compassion for others. But this one was big. And,
Mm.
and especially coming so late in my life,
Mm.
where I thought I had everything under control. And I was so disappointed in my Buddhist practice not being able
Huh.
to deal with it,
Mm.
not I was and that was horrifying to me. And then now
Mm.
I am able to, like, I took what I learned from PTSD and
Mm.
therapy, and like, and then I applied a more hyper vigilant Buddhist practice using some of those concepts.
Mm.
So like my meditation practice changed.
Mm. Mm.
Okay.
Mm.
So that, in other words, my meditation, I tried to, like, turn my meditation. I was much more of an analytical meditator, which is something that happens. That's something that Tibetan Buddhists
Yeah.
can do. I don't know.
Hold up
Yeah.
pretty high, isn't it?
Yeah.
Mm.
So
Mm.
you
Mm.
have a sort of a conversation in your head about principles within the practice. So there, and you do try to come to a feeling understanding of it, but I think we we live so much in our head. I think we don't always do that
Mm. Mm.
properly, and I saw that, and so I started having a much more body-based meditation,
Mm.
somatic type
Mm.
meditation.
And so, can you talk a little bit more about that? I mean, what made you shift, and what kind of practice did you end up doing?
What made me shift was, like, like I said, I was horrified that I wasn't able to deal with these these feelings and
Mm.
these behaviors that I was exhibiting
Mm.
with my
So,
normal practice.
so you just sort of, I think I need a bit more of a body-based practice. Was it that kind of thing?
Well, yeah, only I won't give myself that credit. I won't pat myself on the back. It came from reading everything I could about
Mm.
PTSD and from my therapist.
Mhm.
You know, and so I did. So it was much more like um a heartfelt thing where I was showing, okay, so like if you're doing like a meta practice or Tonglen or something where you're sending love to others, I started doing more towards myself,
Mm.
con- realizing that I was the one in the big trouble here.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
And so I was doing much more protection of myself. There's like there's this there's these family systems therapy where
Yeah.
they talk about the inner child and everything, although I didn't spend a lot of time there because I found it a little disquieting. But I did turn my meditative focus on my body and felt how I felt. Like, I'm feeling anger now. I'm
Mm.
feeling, where did that come from? And try to connect that with maybe something that I thought or something
Mm.
that would just came up from inside of me. And
Mm.
then when I did that, then I would like feel my feet on the floor, feel so like walking meditation,
Mm.
much more body focused meditation seemed to change sort of my whole way of dealing with this surprise attack that I had inside.
This troublesome Buddha, yeah.
This troublesome Buddha that came out of nowhere, but was always there, clearly. But
Mm. Yeah, 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 yeah. I did about 3.5 years of psychotherapy, pretty intense for a while there, and it's often been a question that's come up again. What's the role of psychotherapy in together with or in synergy with our meditation, our Buddhist practice? Would you say?
Well, I've thought a lot about this actually,
Mm.
because and I'd like to hear your opinion as well too,
Mm.
because I think this is something for a little good conversation. But Mark Epstein writes a lot about this, and he
Mm.
just
Mm.
released a new book, which I forget the name of, that he talks about how he integrates his Buddhist practice into his psychotherapy. I shared with my therapist that I was a Buddhist and I had Buddhist practices and so forth, and we discussed it. She was not a Buddhist, so she didn't really know.
Mm.
And I don't know about your experience, but I do think I think they're synchronous. I don't think
Mm. Mm.
um, they're at odds at all. I think that they're definitely synchronous. I do think, however, because I have studied Japanese psychology, Morita therapy in particularly. I think Japanese psychology gets a better handle on it than like the kind of like 3 years of psychotherapy, in your childhood
Psychoanalysis kind of thing.
analysis. Yeah, is that what you had?
No, I didn't have that. No, but I could.
No,
There's
yeah,
a much more. There's a kind of old style Freudian analysis.
Freudian, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't think, therapists today don't do that so
Mm.
much,
Mm. Mm.
but yeah, I do think it's a synchronous in that, um mindfulness or being aware of what's going on inside of you is really the ticket, right? It's really the key. If you want to make friends with your troublesome Buddha, you better get to know him first,
Right.
right? Or
Right.
her or whatever.
Mm.
And
Mm.
instead of, I think a lot of people, when they feel bad, when bad situations happen, or they feel those sort of those emotions arising, if you're not a don't have a strong practice, then you're all about reacting,
Mm.
to it, rather than trying to understand it.
Or sort of, I don't like this. I wish it was. Yeah, push it away, sort of thing. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, which is grasping, right? It's the
Mm.
second noble
Mm.
truth, right? We're grasping as either pushing it away or holding on to it, holding on to the good things and pushing away the bad things. And I think in my my therapist said this actually, and that gave me a real insight. Is she said you were very good at handling your trauma.
Mm.
But
Mm.
in being very good at handling your trauma from a Buddhist perspective, that means I was very good at pushing it away
Yeah. Mm. Mm. Mm.
and compartmentalizing, I guess.
Mm. Mm.
So if you look at it from Buddhist practice, then that is a sign that you need to bring more mindfulness to bear, more meditation to bear on these things.
Mm. Mm. And so the other aspect, I suppose, that psychotherapy doesn't really look at is the Buddha nature side of things. We can it's troublesome, yes, and we can sort of bring it to light and notice how it makes us feel and talk about it and things. But it's that Buddha side of things, the oneness or the
Right.
integrated aspect of it. And so how did that sort of arise, or in what way has that arisen for you?
Oh, very much so, actually. It's in my movement from Tibetan practice to um, practicing in this Bright Dawn lineage. Shin practice is no practice.
Mm.
That's what they say. No practice. Like in Zen, there's the Nembutsu, the chanting of Namo Amida Butsu. Um, that's a considered a practice, but not a practice. But
Mm.
it's been said that Nembutsu is Zazen. It is equal.
Mm.
Um, but
Mm.
in Shin Buddhism, this sense of chanting is, I don't chant a lot, but what they emphasize is listening.
Right.
Okay. And you can listen for your Buddha nature, right? You can listen for, and the listening is deep listening.
Mm.
It's not like listening to the birds, although that's helpful for me, but
Mm.
it's deep listening, to to the Buddha nature, to the beauty, uh, and the perfection that resides within me and everybody else. And if I'm listening to that and I'm hearing that, then I'm not so much focused on what a jerk this other person
Ah,
is,
yeah.
right?
Yep. Mhm.
Or
Mm.
also what a jerk I am. I mean, then
Exactly.
I don't
Mm.
beat myself up for
Mhm.
that. I just
Mm.
know that these obscurations or exist, and pretty soon they'll part, and I'll see
Mm.
my Buddha nature
Mm.
shine like the sun, right?
We all hope,
Yeah,
yeah.
well, yeah, we all hope. It happens briefly on occasion.
On occasion, that's right. Yeah, yeah. So then, I mean, what an amazing situation the pandemic has brought to you then, this kind of arising of this real feeling of resentment, and then this real sort of need or refocusing to look at what it means and where it's come from, and your sort of very recent journey into finding this kind of stuff, and seeing these new perspectives.
Yeah, that's again, it's like you say troublesome Buddha, and all like my other teacher said, bad situations are Buddhas. So this was a Buddha. It's like, I don't know what would have happened if the pandemic didn't happen. I think about that a lot. It's like,
Mm.
would I just continued on and go my merry way,
Yeah,
thinking I had all my what together, you know,
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
until the day I died, I don't know. And
Mm.
and and is that good or is that bad? One thing I know is that every time I've had these kind of troublesome Buddhas in my life, like um uh, the awareness of being gay and having chronic illness, it's always uh created a more compassionate attitude and made me see people in a different way,
mm,
and made me try to look at what were the causes and conditions that made, this happen to this person, and that's why they're behaving this way to me, and that's why I can't react in
mm,
a negative way, because I can see now what's causing that. And so every time one of these things happen in life, then it broadens your perspective,
mm.
right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, looking back at my own life, I can only be thankful, very, very grateful for these kind of situations, although they can be incredibly difficult and painful, uh,
Right.
when they do bring stuff up and you do manage to look at it and things shift. It's like, wow, that person or that situation, it's like that was really something.
Yeah, exactly. It's you would never invite it. You would
Mm.
never say,
Or
"Come,
indeed wish it on anyone.
no, no, come here, troublesome Buddha. I
Yeah.
could use a little shaking up." You would never, you would never invite it. But then once it's there, you got to deal with it the best you
Mm,
can. And I think about this all the time. If I didn't, therapy probably would have gotten me through it, but without my Buddhist practice, I don't know how well I would have made it,
mm,
truthfully.
mm, mm, mm. Yeah, it seems to me like there's a sort of like contextualizing. You do your therapy and it's maybe you go through an acute period where you need to deal with stuff and join some dots and things, but then bringing it back into meditation puts it back into the broad picture, like puts it back into our whole view of the universe.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. It's like therapy does connect the dots. I'm glad you said that. It's like those dots were connected for me, and I never even saw those dots.
That's it, that's right. Yeah.
I never even saw them as a connected line. I just thought, you know,
Mm,
I never even saw it, and then when I saw it, it was like, well, no wonder. And
mm,
then when I brought that aha stuff back into my meditation practice was able to deepen, because I always wondered, I'm no neurophysicist or
mm,
neuroscientist, but I always wondered, it's like, if you didn't have that brought to your consciousness, like the connecting the dots in therapy, um, and you weren't able to bring it to your meditation, is that something that actually can physically deepen your meditation? Because otherwise, you're right here in this shallow place. You,
mm,
I've thought about that, because it seemed to have happened to me. I'm able to get into meditation quicker now than I ever was before. I have less. I'm not a great meditator by any means, and I mean, but I have fewer incidences of, well, that was just a horrible 20 minutes, where
absolutely.
all I was thinking about was breakfast and what I had to do,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
so it helped.
So, I mean, we're coming to the end of our time, I suppose. But one last question. I was wondering if, in amongst all of the teachers you've had over the years, whether there've been some particularly troublesome, like, teachers are amazing, but they can sometimes really be quite difficult.
Troublesome.
Troublesome teachers. I mean, I just as like, I'm just interested. Yeah.
Well, I had some. Yes, I've had troublesome teachers. Now you're making me
Mm.
giggle about this. Okay, uh, and I almost don't want to. I don't want to use names, but
Sure, of course. Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah.
I suppose I'm more interested in not necessarily what happened or what they said or how it was difficult, but more about your process.
Okay, yeah, that actually is true. One of my first troublesome teachers ended up being a very public bad guy.
Mm, okay.
I
Mm,
was, and I learned tremendous amounts from him,
mm,
and it was my first deep study of Buddhism, and I
mm,
and it was so disheartening to me. And then I had counseling or sitting sessions with a couple of lamas, and actually the center director at that Drikung Kagyu Center in Rochester, New York.
Mm,
And
mm,
my center director said something that is everybody knows, and it's common sense. But he said, it's not the teacher, it's the teachings.
mm, mm,
And from then on, he established me from focusing so much on the human behavior of teachers.
mm.
Teachers are human, they are human. And
Right, right.
I always get very disheartened by people who put teachers on a pedestal,
Yeah.
and are disappointed if they, like the book The Guru Drinks Bourbon. I mean, it's like, I think it's not right understanding the first noble truth.
Yeah.
It's not
Mm,
right understanding to look at teachers in that way. So that really taught me,
mm.
you
I
know.
know that my Zen teacher would talk about his teacher in Japan, Shinzen Roshi. Um, if he felt like someone was just starting to lift him up on a pedestal, he'd go out of his way to do something like annoying or difficult to try to sort of smash that. Like sit on the teaching stool and do an enormous fart or something like that. Just to
I
sort of
love it. Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
exactly. That's
yeah.
exactly right. I mean, that is exactly right.
Mm,
And that's the best teaching. And the Tibetan teachers did that too. I'm not saying they
yeah,
didn't do
yeah,
that.
yeah.
It's just I didn't have that kind of experience with them. So,
Mm, 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 mm. Mm. Oh, wonderful! Thank you so much, and thank you for being willing to share your stories and just amazing to hear. Mm,
well, thank you, Mark. I hope this was helpful, and
mm.
I love your podcast, and I'll continue to listen. And
Oh, good.
and
Yeah,
like I'll share with everybody. Maybe if you don't edit this out, I'm going to invite you on my podcast. So,
great, great. Love to. Yeah, yeah. Let's speak soon then. Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
okay. That's it for this summer special episode. I hope everyone is doing okay in this heat, and you're able to remain patient, as the heat and the threat of climate change and all the other scary things happening in the world become troublesome Buddhas that taunt you. My usual reminders are next. Don't forget that you can join me and others in the private donation-supported Everyday Sangha that meets virtually via Zoom every other week on Saturday mornings at 10 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time. The Sangha is currently studying the Diamond Sutra. And also, please consider supporting the efforts of this podcast and related groups by becoming a community member for $5 a month. If you do, you will have access to blogs, members-only podcasts, an education series, a private Facebook group, and the Introduction to Buddhism class, and the new bonus contemplation podcast, which are members-only features and can be found on the members-only Facebook page. If you don't follow me or Everyday Buddhism on any social media platforms we post in, you can go to the Everyday Buddhism website and join the membership community or the Everyday Sangha by going to www.everyday-buddhism.com and click on the tab that says Join Community or Sangha. I can't stress enough how thankful I am to those of you who donate or join our groups. Since I don't seek podcast sponsors and don't ask for financial commitments through a paid podcast membership, my work and the cost of the infrastructure needed to support what I do is entirely self-funded, except for your donations. Thanks to all of you who write in with comments and questions. I do read everything, but of course I can't respond to every question or comment. Another way you can help is to rate and review the podcast on your favorite podcast platform. It is important to share the podcast with others, and rating and reviewing does just that. So if you find this podcast helpful in your life, please take a minute to comment so people will know why you love Everyday Buddhism. Well, that's it for the announcements. And until next time, keep finding ways to make yours and everyone's days better.